If you have a Bible this morning, I'm going to ask you to do a couple of things, just not so terribly difficult, but if you'll do it. If you go to Matthew chapter 1, verse 1. Matthew chapter 1, verse 1. If you'll find that passage, Matthew chapter 1, verse 1. When you've got that, if you'll just put your finger in and hold it, then I'd like for you to go back in the Old Testament and find Nehemiah. Go to Nehemiah chapter 1. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua, Judges, Ruth, Ezra, Nehemiah. So it's not too far from the front. So you can find Nehemiah chapter 1. Now, you have these two passages of Scripture. Matthew 1, beginning of the New Testament. Nehemiah 1, buried deep in the early pages of the Old Testament. When we read through the Bible, and hopefully all of us are involved in reading the Bible and maybe have some sort of a plan of reading through it, when we do that and we come to Nehemiah, we read about all the things that are happening, and then we read the rest of the Old Testament, we sometimes, at least in my mind's eye, I kind of think that chronologically that Nehemiah is in the Bible where it is in the order of the books, but that's not true. Nehemiah, if it was placed chronologically in the Bible, would be back maybe the last one before Matthew chapter 1, verse 1. Nehemiah and Malachi, the last book of the Old Testament, were cohorts. They were contemporaries. They existed at the same time. Both of them wrote their books, and they're not even sure which one of them finished their book last. Some say that Nehemiah was the last book of the Old Testament. Some people say that no, that it was Nehemiah, and then almost at the same time or immediately after was the book of Malachi. But Nehemiah is right at the end of the Old Testament. Israel are slaves to the Babylonians. They have been captured and have been slaves for 70 or so years. It's been quite a while. And so when you come to Nehemiah, which is where we're going to be today, I just want you to keep it in mind chronologically where we're talking about in the Bible. It's one of the last things written before the coming of Christ. It's one of the last things that we have before Christ comes on the scene some 400 years later. So there's this gap of about 400 years between Matthew and Nehemiah. And so while that's happening, we find that the Israelites again are captives of the Babylonians. They have been servants or slaves now, captured for at least 70 years. And they have begun to cry out to God in their servitude and in their slavery and in their situation and condition. They said, God, why don't you spare us? Why don't you do something? There would be a total of three groups that would come from Babylon, Jews that would come from Babylon and go back to Israel, Jerusalem in particular. One of those groups would be led by a man by the name of Ezra, which is the book right before Nehemiah. Ezra went back to Jerusalem to rebuild the temple because he had been back there or had made a trip there or had heard about the situation in Jerusalem, about the Jews that were still in Israel. They had this wonderful, magnificent temple that Solomon had built, but it had been destroyed, one stone not left on the other. It had been desecrated and demolished. And Ezra went back and rebuilt the temple. When he built the temple back, when people saw, the old people, some that could possibly have heard about or would remember maybe Solomon's temple, they sat down and cried because Ezra's temple, while a nice structure and a nice building, was so inferior to Solomon's temple that they cried to think that this is all that they had done for God, realizing the kind of legacy that had been given to them in years past and had been destroyed because of their disobedience. And so Ezra was one of those. And after Ezra is Nehemiah. Nehemiah has been a Jew, has been a slave, a servant. He's been used of God. Don't know a whole lot of anything about his childhood or his youth or anything about his life. We just know that we find him in Nehemiah chapter 1. And if you have your scriptures, it says something like this. The words of Nehemiah, the son of Hakaliah, it came to pass in the month of Chisleu in the 20th year, as I was in Shushan the palace, that Hanani, one of my brethren, came, he and certain men of Judah. And I asked them concerning the Jews that had escaped, which were left of the captivity, and concerning Jerusalem. And they said unto me, the remnant that are left of the captivity, there in the province, are in great affliction and reproach. The wall of Jerusalem also is broken down, and the gates thereof are burned with fire. It came to pass when I heard these words that I sat down and wept, and mourned certain days, and fasted and prayed before the God of heaven. And then it goes on and it gives the prayer for the rest of chapter 1. So Nehemiah has some brethren, and however all of this worked in that day as servants, as slaves, one of Nehemiah's brothers had been allowed to go back to Jerusalem to visit. Whatever the occasion, whatever the reason, we don't know. But he had been there, and when he got back from that trip, Nehemiah met with him, had a family dinner or whatever. And he said, listen, brother, he said, how are things in Jerusalem? How is it with those that had escaped the captivity? And by that he means, how about those people that were left in Jerusalem that were not carried away with the Babylonians into another country? Because in those days, when a nation would capture another nation, they would find the brightest, the smartest, the hardest working, the most talented, the most gifted, the strongest, the wisest, and they would take them back to the country of the captors. And they would leave the rest of the people behind. And so Nehemiah is asking, how are those people that were left behind? What's going on with them? And Nehemiah's brother said, well, it's not good. Jerusalem is in shambles. We're not told here, but we do if we read the earlier book of Ezra. The temple has been rebuilt. They're trying to worship. But even as they start to make progress, there'll be people come in and will loot the temple and be oppressive to them and cause them problems and cause them all kind of conflict. There's people that will disrupt their services. There are people that will not allow them to make the sacrifices. And that's in part because the wall of the city is torn down. There's not one stone left upon another. And you can imagine the size of the wall that had gone around Jerusalem prior to their destruction. A huge wall, so much so that chariots could ride across side by side on the top of the wall. And a huge thing. And he said, not a stone is left upon another. In other words, it's completely destroyed, completely demolished. He said, and the people, they're just not doing well. Wouldn't you know that every time that you do something good, that somebody's going to come along and destroy it and take it away from you and keep you from doing it? And you think that you're getting ahead and somebody comes and takes that. How would that affect you as you're living your life? And Nehemiah said, when I heard those things, I sat down and I wept. Because he's a Jew. And while he's maybe never been to Jerusalem, at least has never lived there, he has this great affinity to his people and to his nation, to serve his God and to love his God. Nehemiah has been gifted with one advantage after another in his life. He has risen to the place or the position or to the title of cupbearer. He waits on the king. When the king sits down to eat, he tastes his food. And he gets his meal from the king's table. When the king starts to drink, Nehemiah is there to drink the first glass or to try the first cup. He drinks the king's drink because he's the cupbearer. He's the taster. Because the most prominent way of getting rid of kings and people of royalty in that day was to poison them. They did not have the sophistication that we have today, and most poisons were pretty quick acting. And so the kings started having cupbearers, somebody that would eat their food and drink their drink before they did. And then they'd wait for a few minutes and just sit and watch them. If they got sick and died, the king said, I'm not eating that. And they get another cupbearer. I mean, it's easier to get a cupbearer than it is to die. And so that was Nehemiah's job. It was a pretty good job. You got to live in the palace. You got dressed for the king. You got all the stuff that you wanted in life. And you got to eat from the king's table every day and to drink from the king's cup. I mean, as far as life goes, according to most people, there wasn't much better. And so Nehemiah had it made. But because of his concern for his nation, because of his concern for his people, because of his compassion toward the things of God, he wanted to know how Jerusalem was. And when he heard about the temple not being what it should be, couldn't be because there was no wall about the city, Nehemiah sat down and he wept. And he wept. And as I read through, and Nehemiah is one of my favorite Old Testament books, as I read through the book, I wonder what it is or what it would take for us to weep. How long has it been since you have wept about something? How long has it been since you just stole away, got off by yourself perhaps, and just had a good cry because of something? Nothing wrong, nothing disgraceful about crying. Crying in public, there's nothing wrong with that. But how long has it been since you have been so moved that you have found yourself weeping and crying because of a particular situation? Maybe it's something in your life. Maybe it's something in the life of a loved one. Maybe it's something that's beyond your control. Maybe it's something that's bigger than you. But you just sit down and you wept because of how things are. I think that if we were to be real serious and not to become so doom and gloom, but we were just to get real serious and were to sit down and take an honest evaluation of our nation, I think for some people it would be enough to cause them to cry and to weep. And I say this not because they're better than anybody else, but military or ex-military in particular, think about what you're fighting for or have fought for, or perhaps first responders that are putting their life on the line every day to go out and to help people and to be treated the way that they're being treated, or as a military person to see that you have served to provide freedoms for this country and people don't care about freedom. In fact, there's a group that seemingly wants to take all of that away from America and away from us, and we don't do anything about it. We just sit back. That's a pretty sad state of affairs. And what do we do about that? What do we do about that? And you know what our answer is usually to that? I pray. I pray that things will get better. I pray that people will wise up. I pray that we get good politicians. You know what an oxymoron is? Yep. That's an opposite, right? That's pretty ugly. Somebody says military intelligence. You know, something that's just diabolically opposed to whatever. Can you imagine how that we live in this country and we pray for good politicians? I don't know how many of them we know. I don't know how many of them we are, or how many of them there are in our country today. Not that they're not people that have good hearts. Sometimes it seems like that if they're in that very long, they get carried away to their own interests. No matter what side of the political issues they're on, they get carried away with their own interests instead of the interest of the people that they serve. And so Nehemiah is sitting here and he's weeping. And somebody said, well, Nehemiah, what do you think you can do about it? You're just a wine taster. You're just a food taster. You don't have any abilities. You don't have any position. You don't have any title. You don't have any monies. You don't have any equipment. You don't have any followers. You don't have anything that could be used to somehow make a difference. And so Nehemiah wept. And apparently from the scriptures, it's not just a matter of one time sitting down and having a cry. But he sat down, it seems like time after time, day after day, and he wept because of what had happened and what's happening to his country. And as he prays for forgiveness for his sin, prays for forgiveness of the sins of his nation and of his people, prays that the people's heart, his and theirs, would turn from where they are back to the things of God. And then he came up with this idea. You're of the age group that if I say Walt Disney, you know who I'm talking about, right? The founder of the Disney World Empire, Walt Disney. Pretty nice guy from all that I know about him or have read about him or know of him, as far as I know. But Walt Disney had this kind of philosophy in life. When he would come to a board meeting of the people that he was dealing with and the people that was working for him, and he came to a board meeting and he presented an idea. If that idea passed in the board meeting, and anybody that ever has had to meet with a board or people that you were going to have to answer to, your object or goal is to always get your point of view across and to get what you want out of the meeting, right? You don't go there to be told no. You go there to get your way. Walt Disney, when he would go to a board meeting, and if the board agreed with what he said, he would come away extremely upset. Because Walt Disney said, I just haven't dreamed big enough. I mean, if they think it's possible, I'm not dreaming big enough. And can you imagine that kind of a thing as a governing position in life? If you think that it can happen, then we're not thinking big enough. If you think it can happen, then I've shot way too low. I'm not nearly doing what I need to be doing, having the vision that I need to have. So Nehemiah comes and he begins to think, what can happen? What can take place? And I would say, you would say perhaps that God began to stir his heart. And Nehemiah came up with this thing from God, or however it came to him. And he says, I'm going to go back and build a wall. But I can't do that because I don't have money. Do you know how much it would cost to build a wall around an entire city? Do you know how many people you'd have to hire? Do you know how much material it would take? Do you know how many days it would take to build a wall around a city? I mean, it takes our federal government 6 months to do a half-mile of highway. How long would it take to build a wall around a city that was 30 foot tall and yards and yards wide so that 2 or 3 chariots can ride along at the same time? How long would it take to build a wall like that in that day? How long would it take? I heard this morning, New Orleans, they were building a motel, was it? And it collapsed like 8 or 10 months ago, 10 or 11 months ago. And the new structure is so fragile and so delicate that they haven't been able to rescue everybody out of it or retrieve everybody's body out of it. And they retrieved a guy yesterday or this morning after 8 or 9, 10 months of being, I think it was a crane operator, you know, one of those high cranes up on the top of the building. They retrieved his body after all that time. That kind of technology didn't exist in Nehemiah's day. Not to build things like that. And he said, how can I build that? And then, by God's direction, obviously, he said, I think I'll just ask the king. The king's got everything there is. He's in charge of it all. He's got everything at his disposal. So Nehemiah came before the king, and we'll have to take a lot of time to go through the story, but he came before the king, and when the king saw that he was sad, the king says, Nehemiah, what's wrong? And he said, King, how can I be happy when my people are destitute? How can I be happy when my king or my people are being overrun? How can I be happy when my people are being persecuted, even put to death? How can I be happy when they are defenseless? King, they need a wall about their city. And King, if it would be possible, I'd like to have permission from you to take a sabbatical and go back to Jerusalem and to build a wall. King said, fine, how long you need? He said, well, I don't know for sure. He said, well, take whatever time you want. Take as much time as you want. Nehemiah said, thank you, King, I appreciate that. I'll go back and I'll build the wall. He said, oh, King, it's kind of kind of a hazardous journey from here to there. Would it be possible for you to send me a military escort so that I can get back there alive? And the king said, that's no problem. I'll give you a military escort. And while you're there, I'll have them watch over you and keep you safe while you're there. I said, thank you, king. He said, king, he said, I don't want to be a pest, but I'll be honest with you. I don't have anything to build a wall with. I need rocks, stones, cut stones. I need timbers out of the cedars of Lebanon. I need all kinds of stuff. And king, I'm going to need a workforce of hundreds, maybe hundreds and hundreds of people to accomplish this. King, is there any way that you'd like to donate those things so we can build a wall? King said, well, sure, Nehemiah. Just here's a blank check. Just whatever you need, just get it. And so Nehemiah went back and he had everything that he needed on the order of the king. Materials, protection, task in front of him, but he just needed workers. And Nehemiah said, well, here's how we're going to solve that problem. Because in those days, in a city, a walled city, people lived in the wall. They had apartments, or they had rooms built in these stone walls. And people lived in a section of the wall. Between this gate and that gate, and there were 12 gates. Between these gates, there would be dozens of people that would live in this section. And so Nehemiah called all the people together. He said, hey, listen, people, here's how it's going to happen. I've got permission from the king to be here. I've got permission to build the wall. I've got materials coming from the king anywhere that I want them from. So there's nothing that we need or have need of that can keep us from building the wall except we need laborers. And here's where you're going to come into play. I want you to go back to that portion of the wall where your family is from, maybe where you live now, and I want you to build that section of the wall. Here's the guidelines, the specifications, the way that the wall needs to be built, and I want you to build it so that when you build your portion, it's going to join and fit perfectly to the people right next to you, and we'll go all the way around the wall, and we're going to build the wall. And so all of the people chipped in. They started building the wall. Now, this whole process obviously wasn't without opposition. There were people within the city, within Nehemiah's group, who said, Nehemiah, that job's too big. You can't do it. It can't be done. It's impossible to be accomplished. You can't rebuild the city of this wall. It will not happen. Nehemiah said, by God's grace, it'll happen. There were people on the outside that said, listen, if you start to build the wall, even if a little fox comes and puts his paws up against the wall, it'll fall over. You're not capable of building a wall like that. And then they said, and if it even start to get anywhere near successful in starting to build, we'll come in, and as marauders come in and destroy you and the wall and everything else, we're not going to let it be built. The king said, did you forget I have the king's bodyguards here? I have the king's army here to protect me and protect our city while we build the wall. And so Nehemiah started. Obviously, lots of things involved. But in 52 days, the wall was completed. Within 52 days, the wall was finished. Now, when I look at our country, I look at our world, there's the whole issue of COVID, which is a whole different beast unto itself, whatever it is or isn't. But in addition to that, there's all the other stuff. I'm not talking about political stuff. I'm talking about stuff. The thing about politics is that one party or the other wants to grab hold of everything and make it their stuff. This is our political agenda. And a lot of stuff isn't political agenda, it's just stuff that has to be dealt with. Rioting and looting, destroying and being destructive. That's not a political issue. That's a righteousness issue. That's a law or a lawlessness issue. That's an issue that needs to be dealt with in kind and to be dealt with very severely. The things that are going on to take from those that have and give to those that have not. The thing that we give To those that have not is food to eat, shelter, and the opportunity of a job to become what they want to be. And so Nehemiah says, this is what we're going to do. 52 days, he built a wall. That's 7 weeks. That's less than 2 months. He stayed just a little while after the wall was built, and then he went back to king. Now, you and I have been given the opportunity in our country, in our time, in our day, to say, God, you have blessed us beyond measure. You've given us people that are a part of our family, and I want to thank you for each one of them and for how special they are. My prayer, our prayer, is that they know Christ and that they're in right relationship with Him, and they're going to live their life the way God wants them to live their life. But I want to thank you for it, and we're going to build together. I want to thank you for my job. I want to thank you for my community. I want to thank you for my church. Our church has a great responsibility before God to do something to be impactful to the world. What can we do? We're small in number. We live in a little town. We don't have title and position and resources and ability to do what all needs to be done. But when you start looking at what you've got, when you begin to look at what you've got, you have the potential of doing anything that God would call us to do. I don't want to give you the big head this morning, but some of the finest people that you'll find anywhere in the world are sitting in this room this morning. Now, there's a couple that's got some edges on us that we need to have ground down a little bit, but, you know, for the most part, there's some pretty special people here with a great deal of ability and opportunity and knowledge to know how to get things done. In addition to that, for a church our size, we at the present time are overwhelmed with people that are sick and afflicted, not with just stuff, but with major things. And thankful for your prayers and concern and compassion. You're ministering to them and helping them in a great variety of different ways. We have what a lot of churches don't have, and we have some pretty amazing singers in our church. Patty and I have watched, she's watched a little bit and fell asleep, but some Gaither type things, and just to watch the different singers and stuff. And Patty will say, you know who that reminds me of? And she'll talk about one of the people that sings here. They're just good. They do a good job. We've got that. A lot of places don't have that. I mean, have you ever heard nails on a chalkboard? Some people, when they have special music, that's kind of what they got. We've got some very gifted people here, and we thank the Lord for that. We don't have the greatest of equipment, the most equipment that any church has, but we've got decent stuff. And we've got some people operating that do an outstanding job with what we've got. I have watched, as maybe you have, a variety of different churches that are doing online stuff. And bless their heart, give them credit, they're trying, they're doing the best perhaps that they can do. But it's sad. But the stuff that we put out isn't all that good compared to all of the lights and all of the stuff and all of the fancy background type of stuff. But it's done well, it's done solid, and it presents the truth. We're thankful for the people that we have. We're thankful for the leadership of the church. Whatever position it is that you're able to do, you're doing some amazing things. We've got some people that are very helpful in the Bible programs at the local schools. We've got people that are involved in a variety of different things. Did I hear that you're a Gideon? Is that
part-time?
Mike's a Gideon, part-time? You know, and doing a pretty amazing work through different types of ministries and through different types of missions. And we've got an awful lot going for us. And there's no reason why that if God would speak to our heart and show us the need of our community, of our town, of our state, of our world, there's no reason why that if we sat and wept that we couldn't come up with ways to share the gospel of Jesus Christ to a lost and dying world in effective ways that will see lives changed and transformed. Nehemiah did it. He was just a cupbearer. Would you say that your job today is as important as a cupbearer? Maybe a lot more safe than a cupbearer's job? Because he didn't know from one sip to the next if he'd be around for the next meal. I mean, he just didn't know. But most of us don't live with that reality. We live thinking, I'll be here today and I'll be here tomorrow. I don't know what all your gifted at, but I know that you've got enough stuff going on in your life and your abilities and your talents that you can help to make a difference. Nehemiah said, King, here's what I think that God wants me to do. And what would we come and say? This is what I think God wants me to do. How can we make a difference? How can you make a difference? How can you make a difference? Some of you are caught up in local community stuff, and that's wonderful. Be an influence for Christ in all that you do through that. Some of you are caught up in missions, and that's wonderful. Be glorifying to Christ in all that you do, in all the ways that you help and support. Some of you are caught up in different types of programs and ministries and things. More power to you, as long as it's honoring and glorifying God. Do it and share Christ through all of those things. Some of you have private, personal interactions with people in our community through different stations or different positions in life. And that's wonderful. Just everybody that you share with, let them know about the love of Christ. And sometimes it just starts for a while with a smile on your face. How are you doing today? To win a relationship and a confidence with them that you can share them with Christ. Talked to a gal yesterday. She's getting married in January, and talking about the marriage and ask how things are coming and how things are coming along. And she said, pretty good. So how long have you been engaged? Well, like a month. I said, a month? You're getting married in January? That's pretty good. She said, well, we've been going together for 7 years. Say he's a farmer. He doesn't know anything about quick. He just takes his time in doing everything. So I think we got most things pretty well under control, except for one little deal. I said, what's the deal? She said, communication. If you can't communicate, I don't care what else you got going for you, it's not good English, but it ain't going to work. You got to have communication, right? So we talked for quite a while about communication and how to begin to develop some things in communicating one with another. There's people that are just waiting. And when she left, she said, I hope we can talk about this again sometime soon. I said, fine. She's one of the nurses that came to check up on her Hattie. Hopefully she'll be back this next week or maybe in the next couple of weeks, and we'll have a chance to talk with her. It doesn't take long to build a relationship with people, and you have opportunities of doing this. Let's see what God has in store for us in the days ahead. Would you like to be a part of the world changers? People that are involved in changing the world for Christ's sake? Because I don't know that there's ever been too many times in all of history of mankind when things have been darker and more dreadful and gloomier than what they are right now. And while all of that is a dark weight on our shoulders, it just simply means that light will shine brighter than it can possibly be imagined in the darkness of the time that we're in. Dear Heavenly Father, would you speak to our heart? Would you guide and direct and bless? Would you give us a compassion and a heart and a desire such as that which Nehemiah had? No matter where we are in life, no matter what our station, no matter what our position in life is. As people here today, and even people that are listening by the online things that are happening, we have been gifted with the privilege of being born in America, in a land of free and freedom. We have been blessed most with more material things than we need. We have been blessed for the most part with good health, with good minds, and with good opportunities laid before us. Father, as with Nehemiah, would you help us to realize that We may not have all of the things that we need to see everything done that needs to be brought about and changed, but we know the King, and the King is prepared to give exceedingly abundantly above all that we ask or think, if we seek his face and desire to live for him righteously and holy, and desire to live for him in a way that brings honor and glory to you. And would you begin to speak to our heart and our mind about what we can do to make a lasting difference in people's lives today? Not only today, but throughout the days ahead. Not only the days ahead, but throughout ages without end, as we step out of this life into life eternal. Father, for what you do, we'll acknowledge and give thanks today, but we ask and pray and give thanks in Christ's name. Amen. Thanks for being with us today. Come back next Sunday. Invite somebody to come with you, will you? We're going to have the Morris family here. That's the family with all the kids, and they do a great job. I think they were here in town last night singing and coming back this next weekend. So anybody that's heard them, invite them, and they'll be glad that we're here. Bring them with you, will you? We are not having a meal next Sunday. We're just having them come and share with us and sing. So be aware of that, but just bring people and have them come and join me next Sunday. Lord bless you. Thanks for being here today.